Well, we continue on in the feasts of Israel, and I brought back the Little Orphan Annie, decoder pin again to remind you that this is sort of a mystery. Every time the Apostle Paul uses the word mystery, he doesn't mean a mystery like, we'll never figure this out. It's just a mystery. It's a mystery in the sense that it's something that God has deliberately clouded just a little bit in order to motivate us to look into it. And in that process, looking into it. So that was the Little Orphan Annie decoder pin too. You spin it around, get the numbers off the radio, and it makes a message that you didn't expect to be there. Well, in the Feast of Israel, there's a message there that you never expect to be there. And so that's what we're trying to uncover, right? That's what we're trying to do right now. By the way, the whole intent of this, what I just quoted, comes out of Proverbs, and it says, it's the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search things out. Proverbs 25. And so there's a lot of that in the Bible. God many times takes some things and clouds them just a little bit. So you scratch your head when you read them and go, what? and then you think about it and you pray about it and you study other scriptures, and all of a sudden you realize, it's behind the question when people came up to Jesus and said, why do you always speak in parables? Right? Well, we sort of understand that. He gives an answer, and he basically says, for the people who really wouldn't absorb the truth, I don't want them to absorb this truth. It'll confuse them more than anything else. So we cloak it a little bit. But in that cloaking, right, as we undo the parable, then you stand back and go, why didn't you just say that? Well, because our efforts is what helps it kind of stick in our heads. The discovery process is a great one. There's a discovery process in the Feast of Israel. So that's what we're doing in a sense like that. Before we look at what we're going to look at today, I want to tell you about an incredible event that happened just yesterday. Just yesterday, very early in the morning yesterday, before the sun came up, it was around 5 a.m. or something like that. It turns out, I'm going to go all scientific on you. It turns out the moon got exactly between the earth and the sun. If you draw a line from the earth to the sun, the moon was sitting on that line. What? Yes. And that particular astronomical lineup many times causes a solar eclipse, right? Because the earth's in the way of. It didn't yesterday because the moon kind of wobbles a little above and a little below and stuff like that. It was below, so there was no solar eclipse. But what it was is when that moon goes on the line between you and the sun, it is a new moon. What? Yes. And so it turns out that yesterday, if you could see the sun go down yesterday, which we couldn't because clouds, but if you could see the sun go down last night, then as it hit the horizon in the west and just barely dipped below the horizon, still some light in the sky, you would have seen just to the left of the setting sun a tiny thin crescent moon that was about half a fist away from the sun. When I say half a fist is the distance the moon moves in one day in the sky, the width of your fist. About a half a fist. You would have seen the sun going down, the sky starting to lose all of its light, and there as the sun starts to go down, just to the left of it, just to the left of it, you would have seen this wispy, tiny crescent. And according to Jewish tradition, new moon starts when the first person sees that crescent. And so many times, like yesterday, there was too many clouds, so you can't tell when the new moon starts. And why is that important? Because every month on the Jewish calendar starts on a new moon. And so they would have observers all around the place looking. Did anyone see the crescent last night? Was there a crescent last night? Because for like a week before the crescent shows up, you can't tell. It's dark. The moon's not in the sky. But when the sun goes down and there's a crescent. So tonight, if it's not cloudy, and you look up in the sky as the sun goes down tonight, as it hits the horizon and the sky starts to darken, you'll see a sliver crescent, now a fist and a half to the left of the sun. And that means that on the Jewish calendar, today is the first day of the month because it's a new moon. And since we're just into spring, this is the beginning of spring, today is the first day of Nisan. It's the day at the top of this calendar we've been looking at for months. tonight, at sunset, is the first day of Nisan. It's the first day of the year. Woohoo! Well, I get goosebumps. You don't get goosebumps. I do. But I think that's way cool. We've been looking at this calendar so long, and I actually knew a couple months ago that this morning we would be on the first day of Nisan as we're coming close to looking at these feasts right up here near the first of Nisan. Which means, the last week we looked at Passover, which means if we are in ancient Israel, the first of Nisan comes on the 10th day of Nisan, 10 days from today. If you were a Jew in Israel, 10 days from today, you would go out to your herd and you would select a lamb that was spotless on the 10th day of the month. And then the 14th day of the month, 2 weeks from today, you would slaughter that lamb for Passover. And then for the following week, it would be the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And during that Feast of Unleavened Bread, which we haven't studied yet, during that Feast of Unleavened Bread, when a Sabbath day, a Saturday would fall somewhere in that week of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, on that day, the next day you would celebrate, after the Sabbath, you would celebrate the first fruits, or the beginning of the harvest, which we found out was the day Jesus rose from the dead. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, that's the brief overview. Anyway, we're on the calendar for today. Okay, today we're going to look at something I teased you about last week. Before we do the last feast, which is the unleavened bread, I told you we'd get to that, and it's very important. I said before we get to that, and we close this whole thing out, we need to look at the hidden celebration in Leviticus 23. And some of you went and looked in Leviticus 23 and said, I don't see it. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, let's see if we can figure it out. So here's the mystery for today. Today's decoder ring thing is this. What's hidden? Well, again, we always go back to Leviticus 23, the 7 appointed feasts, and so that's what we're going to do today. So here it is, Leviticus 23. There's all the chapter of Leviticus 23. Can you read that? I can't. That's Leviticus 23. So what we decided to do, and Jim's crazy idea, was to study these backwards. We're studying them backwards. So remember, there were the 7 feasts, and the first one we looked at was the last one on here, the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Shacks, I call it. Sukkot, right? We did that. So there it is down there. There's the Feast of Booths on there. Number 6 is the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. There it is, right in there. Okay. We studied that. Number 5, we looked at the Feast of Trumpets, or the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, Rosh Hashanah. 4 is right above that, is the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot. So we looked at that. So we're covering our bases pretty well. Number 3, we looked at the Feast of First Fruits, Reshit, and we looked at that. So there it is right up there on number 3. Number 2 is the Feast of Unleavened Bread that I actually said we're going to wait and do that last. Why? Because I said so. So unleavened bread, Hag HaMatzah. By the way, Hag HaMatzah, that last word, matzah, is matzah. You know the bread that's used during Passover? Matzah. Yeah, there's bread. Okay? And then number 1 on the list, which we looked at last year, was Passover or Pesach. So there's the list. I mean, we've used up all of the feasts right there. There's some white space here. There's a little white space down here at the bottom. We can look at that and see if maybe that's the hidden feast that Jim is teasing us about. It says, thus Moses declared to the people of Israel the appointed feast of the Lord. That's not it. Okay. There's some stuff at the top up there in the white section. That white section, as we start the chapter of Leviticus 23, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the people of Israel, say to them, these are the appointed feasts of the Lord that you shall proclaim as holy convocations. They are my appointed feasts. They're the ones that God designed. Well, that's not it. But right after that up there is another paragraph. The Sabbath. 6 days shall work be done. And on the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwelling places. And that, my friends, is the hidden celebration. That was great. But wait, that's not on the list of 7. I know. Hold on to that for a second. But when you look at the word Sabbath, many times crazy things come to mind. For instance, what comes to mind many times are the prohibitions of the Sabbath. And I could give you tons of modern day prohibitions to the Sabbath. You know, one of my favorite ones, well, favorite's not the word, as a technologist, in Israel today, technology is used to help accommodate some of the restrictions of the Sabbath. So, for instance, it's against the Sabbath to turn on a light switch. Can't flick a switch. And the reason for that is if you got a microscope and you looked inside of that switch, when you flick a switch, when there's electricity in it, it makes a spark, and a spark is a fire, and a fire is against the Sabbath. So technology, what they do is, and this is what I think is really great, some guys designed a light switch on the wall that's activated by you blowing on it. Because it's not against the Sabbath to breathe, right? So if you happen to breathe close to the light switch, bing, cool. That's kind of cool. So there's lots of ways you can accommodate it. They're not workarounds, but they're just trying to respect the laws. But there's actually in the Mishnah is the written down oral law that the rabbis have carried forward for generations actually. And they were first written down in the Mishnah is what it's called, around 5th, 6th century, many centuries after the Bible was actually in circulation in the world. The Mishnah was written. And they wrote down some of these things. There's a very famous one in the second order of the Mishnah. There's 6 orders in the Mishnah. The second one has a section, the second order is all about the celebrations from Leviticus and about all the rules and the regulations and sacrifices. So the Mishnah, second order, and it has a section called the Shabbat. And so in Shabbat 7:2, Shabbat is Sabbath, here's the restrictions. So here's the 39 restrictions that were written around 500, 600, 700 AD to carry forward. Just so no, you cannot do these things. You cannot, no sowing, no plowing, no reaping, no binding sheaves, no threshing. You can't thresh what you harvest. No winnowing, no cleansing, can't grind, no sifting, no kneading, no baking, now we're into sheep, no shearing, no washing wool, no beating or combing the wool, no dyeing the wool, no spinning the wool, don't weave the wool. You can't make 2 loops, you can't weave 2 threads, you can't separate 2 threads, you can't tie a knot, you can't loosen a knot, you can't sew 2 stitches. Tearing in order to sew 2 stitches is bad. How about hunting? Hunting a deer, no slaughtering, no flaying, no salting, no curing its hide, no scraping, no cutting it up. Yeah. No writing 2 letters or erasing in order to write 2 letters. No building, no demolishing, no extinguishing, no kindling, no striking with a hammer, no carrying from one domain to another. So, if you make sure that you obey the Sabbath by not doing these things, you're okay. But for many times, okay, the Sabbath idea is it majors on what you should not do, right? And so what we want to try and do today is change that negative attitude toward the Sabbath and paint a more positive picture, because it's in this Leviticus 23 list. It seems important. In the Christian community, we don't get stuck on the prohibitions. You know what we get stuck on in the Christian community about Sabbath? Yeah, we get stuck on the day. Okay. So, there's plenty of distractions to go around when we talk about the Sabbath. What you should or shouldn't do, and what the day of the week is supposed to be. In this particular case, there's a passage that really holds some significant sway. Paul says in Colossians 2, therefore don't let anyone pass judgment on you in questions of food or drink. That's kosher law, actually. Or with regard to a festival, like the Leviticus 23 festivals, or a new moon, like yesterday was a new moon, or a Sabbath. I mean, don't let them get on you. These are a shadow of the things to come. The substance belongs to Christ. So let's get away from those issues for a second. Let's just kind of put them on the table. We can talk about them all we want later on. But I don't think it's central, because what Paul's saying in Colossians is there's something more central that the Sabbath points to. That's not really what you do on the Sabbath. It points to something bigger, a reality that's more profound and more enduring and more eternal. The Sabbath itself points to something bigger. And that's what he says right there. It's just a shadow of the things to come. The substance is Christ. So what is he talking about? That's what we want to dive into today. And is the Sabbath something we should be concerned about as Christians? And how so? And so what do we do or not do? I mean, what is this all about? Okay? Now, in the same way as we've gone through Leviticus 23, and we've looked at the 7 festivals, we haven't done the last one yet, but we looked at those festivals, all the way through it, we realized, there's something more going on than what this festival is about. I mean, there's something that this is pointing to that's bigger and more eternal. There's something that God is trying to teach us in the grand cosmic sphere of things, in the sequence of these things, that we need to sit down and contemplate, because God said as they were leaving Egypt, as they're going on the Exodus, before you guys get too involved with staying alive in the desert, staying alive, before you get involved in that, what you need to do is realize that on the calendar, I am giving you 7 things that you need to celebrate through the year, and they're important to you, and you need to do them. And in the doing of them, bing, light bulbs will go off in your head about what God intends for you as a people of God. So that's what we're doing right now. The same is true of the Sabbath. There's something, bing, that needs to go off in your head that's telling you something much more profound when we look at the Sabbath. More profound than what you should and shouldn't do or what day of the week it is. Much more profound than that. So that's what we want to explore today. Now, see, this is really odd because we skip past this. Someone tells you, like I would say, go to Leviticus 23 and look at the list of the 7 appointed feasts designed by God himself for us to do. And you skip right over the Sabbath verse. You skip right over the Sabbath verse. Why? Because it's not one of the 7. But then why did he put it here? Why is it that he wrote about these are the appointed feasts of the Lord and then starts off by talking about the Sabbath? Is it or is it not a feast? That's a good question, but why does he leave it here? And I will propose, and we'll see if this works as we get to the end, I'll propose because the Sabbath itself is a bigger picture of even what the collective feasts picture. Yeah, these do go together, which is why in his header, in his title, the title paragraph of the whole section on the 7 feasts, he says, think Sabbath. And then he tells you about the 7 feasts. Okay, let's go somewhere with this. By the way, today I'm going to help you through this. It helped me at least. If they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, I always maintain that a story is worth 10,000 words. So today we're going to have 2 stories to help you out on this. A lot of verses, but 2 stories principally, and the 2 stories will help you a ton in terms of understanding the Sabbath. So wait for these 2 stories. Okay, so here's what he says right here. We'll just examine the verse itself and see if it gives us some clues about the Sabbath itself. He says, now we read this slowly, 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest. By the way, it doesn't say Saturday or Sunday, but it does say after 6 consecutive days of work, rest. That's literally what it says. So keep that in mind. Next time we get into that debate, we're not going to do that debate today, but that's literally what it says. But then this is what I find fascinating. On the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest. And actually in the Hebrew, it says Shabbat, Shabbathom. It's actually 2 words that mean Sabbath. The solemn rest is this other word that's only used half a dozen times when we talk about these feasts. But that solemn rest that's a big deal because it says that somehow, okay, we're not supposed to work. I get that. That's the easy part. But what is a solemn rest? That's a fascinating term, and it's just a single word. So as you go back in the Hebrew, it takes you a while to figure out what it means. And unfortunately, it doesn't find much definition. All it really basically says is you're going to have a Sabbath rest and you're going to really rest, is what this second word means. You're going to really rest. It's a solemn rest. It's like a worshipful rest, is what it's saying. It's like a holy place where you rest. You don't just say, well, okay, end of the week, I'm going to take some time off and I'm not going to work tomorrow. No, there's something more solemn about it. So that's one emphasis that clues us in. The other emphasis, okay, he says, do no work. It's a Sabbath to the Lord. It's not a Sabbath to you. Okay, wait, what? It's a Sabbath to the Lord. So the solemn aspect of the rest is bringing the Lord and a relationship with the Lord into the picture. It's to the Lord. It's a solemn rest to the Lord. So that's really our definition of what the Sabbath is. It's a solemn rest to the Lord. It's not just don't do things. It means do something. And what is that do that you do? Well, it's the solemn rest to the Lord. It's incorporating the Lord in that day. Okay, so just hold on to that. That's really key. Okay, let's do story number 1. You know the story really well. Luke 10:38. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And as she went up, she went to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you're anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. And Martha has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Now, we get in that and say, well, was Martha wrong? Martha was not wrong. Was Mary wrong because she wasn't helping with the hospitality? No, Mary was not wrong. There are two modes in which we operate. One is working and the other is not. And so in this household, as Jesus comes, you see the work week and the Sabbath week side by side in Martha and Mary. Right there. Now, neither the 6 days of work are wrong, nor is the 1 day of Sabbath right or wrong. I mean, they both have their place. You know, like Solomon wrote, everything has a season. But when it comes down to the 6 days of work, you follow it with 1 day of rest, and they're both necessary. They work together. Just like in the household with Mary and Martha, they both work together. There's nothing wrong with what went on here. But Jesus does say, what Mary has chosen to do is a necessary thing. Okay, the work is okay, and there's nothing wrong with the work, Martha, but she has chosen a necessary thing. She chose something that stands out. And so even in this picture of of the work week and the Sabbath living side by side in a visit from Jesus, Mary is doing a solemn rest to Jesus. You see that? The two means there's a relationship. There's a connection. So Mary has decided to stop working, even though there's some legitimate reasons why, you got to make food. There's people in the house. But she decides, I'm going to stop doing that because, hey, Jesus is here. I'm going to lay that stuff down because that's necessary. She has a solemn rest to the Lord. Now, don't get too harsh on Martha. We love Martha tremendously. We love both of them. We see them in some other cases in the stories in the New Testament. But I just thought this was a great juxtaposition of a solemn rest to the Lord. It has to be about Jesus. It's not. It would be a different story if Jesus wasn't in the house. I mean, if there were people coming over for dinner and Martha's running around like crazy doing stuff, and Mary's just sitting in the front living room, kind of going do 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 do. And Martha says, "Hey, what are you doing? We got people coming. We got responsibilities. We got to cook food. We got to do something." And that would be wrong. She's kind of shirking her responsibilities, but she's not shirking her responsibilities when she decides to rest solemnly with the Lord. She's not shirking responsibilities. And that's different. Why? Because the Lord's there. He's there. He changes the whole context of rest for her. So that's just I'm speaking obvious things. You know this story. But this gives us an insight into the Sabbath, even though this is not on a Sabbath day. Jim, this isn't a Sabbath. What's the Sabbath thing? The Sabbath is the solemn rest to the Lord. That's what you see Mary doing. Great story. We'll do another story later. Okay, some verses. Moses is talking with God about the logistics problems of getting these people in the promised land. So he starts out in verse 12 of chapter 33 in Exodus. Moses says to the Lord, "See, you say to me, bring up these people. Bring these people." And he goes on and he kind of rags about all the problems he's having. And then at the very end, this is great. In verse 14, God says, "My presence will go with you and I'll give you rest." Because clearly Moses is not at rest up here about this task of bringing these crazy, ornery people in the promised land. Read around Exodus 33. You'll see what Moses is dealing with. He's clearly not at rest. But this last phrase I think is just stunning because God says, shh, shh, shh. My presence will go with you and I'll give you rest. There's a guy that I follow by the name of Rich Robinson. He works with Jews for Jesus right now. Smart man. He's got a PhD in theology. Met him briefly when he visited us in Spokane. But Rich wrote a book on the Sabbath, which I dearly love. I forget the title of it, but look it up. His name's Rich Robertson. But in that book, Rich said a wonderful thing in just observing about this phrase right here. And the phrase he said was, where God is, in that place, Israel finds rest. Isn't that a great phrase? I tried to kind of reword it so I wouldn't have to give him credit. We're such idiots. But I thought, no, Rich, man, you got it right. This is really good. Where God is in that place, Israel finds rest. And you see this historically through all the accounts with Israel. Where God is and where they realize God is, they find rest. And there's good reasons for that, because there's a lot of circumstances in their travels that would cause you to lay awake at night and worry. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things that legitimately are threats to your existence, or losses that bring grief to you, or so many challenges that you don't know how you're going to overcome. These things are legitimate concerns we have. God's given us enough of a brain to say this is a problem. But when God is brought into that equation, when God is brought into that situation, you can go, oh, God's here. And you can rest. Ooh. Where God is in that place, Israel finds rest. So when we talk about this solemn rest to the Lord, there's a component in it, in the to the Lord part, about recognizing the presence of God where you are. That's part of the Sabbath, is understanding that God is here. And as a result of him being here, you can find rest. Jeremiah 31. God says, "For I will satisfy the weary soul, and every languishing soul I will replenish." Is that not the best word ever? This is why you can find rest in the presence of God. Because he's concerned about you needing rest. I'll satisfy the weary soul. Every languishing soul, I will replenish. Does that remind you of another verse in the New Testament? We read it already today. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Rest for your souls. Jesus is God, so it makes sense that he would actually be almost directly quoting Jeremiah 31 when he says this. Fascinating. Now, Hebrews puts an interesting spin on this. If you've never read Hebrews, we studied it several years ago. You guys are, yeah. Are you finished with Hebrews yet?
No, we just finished chapter 10.
Oh, chapter 10. Ooh.
Rest.
Oh, yeah, the topic of rest comes up over and over in Hebrews. So I just pulled out one quote right here. Let me just read it, and we'll come back and look at it a little more closely. He says, if Joshua had given them rest, Joshua brought them in the promised land. If Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. So let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. Now, this is way out of context. I encourage you to read chapter 4, and read all of Hebrews, and just keep going. But rest is one of the biggest words in all of what he writes in Hebrews. And he uses it in a sense of a Sabbath idea. It's a Sabbath idea. Rest is a Sabbath idea, right? And he uses rest and the Sabbath idea as an overarching meme throughout all of Hebrews, which starts to give us insight to the fact that maybe in the Leviticus 23 inclusion of Sabbath at the beginning of it, maybe he's trying to say that the concept of Sabbath rest, this solemn rest to the Lord, is actually an overarching theme and meme of everything. Because that's where it starts to take me. Maybe this is bigger than I ever thought. Maybe this is much bigger than what I should or shouldn't do tomorrow. Maybe it's bigger than whether it's Sunday or Saturday. Maybe there's something much more profoundly deep about it being a picture in daily experience as a sign of what God has promised to us. Maybe it's much bigger than I thought. And the writer of Hebrews says that very thing. In fact, what he talks about right here is the fact that although they came into the promised land, don't be fooled, Israel, that is not your final rest. Although it's called rest, and it is. Interestingly enough, the real entry into the promised land, the real historical entry into the promised land, yes, it did provide rest. And the narrative, including Exodus and more, talk about the fact that they found some rest there. But guess what? That's only a picture of the bigger rest that is to come. So you mean the historical reality of coming to the promised land, that's not the capital R rest for the people of God? No. It is a rest, but it's pointing to the big rest. the big rest of a solemn rest to the Lord. So that's what the writer of Hebrews is saying. And, his audience is largely Jewish, so he's saying, if you thought that was it, that's not it. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And 10 is just a fascinating thing. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. And that speaks profoundly to the new covenant idea that salvation comes not on the basis of what we do and what we achieve and what we work and what we earn from God for salvation. It has nothing to do with those works and that effort. It has everything to do with what God has given us through his son, Jesus. And so what do? Those who understand how salvation works, what do? Well, we stop working to achieve our salvation. And we suddenly find ourselves, even now, in the presence of a solemn rest to the Lord because we've stopped trying to earn our salvation from him. Cease from our works. Now, verse 11 also is profound, and you need to go back and read Hebrews. It's profound because he uses an example that even though a promise of rest is coming from God, God promises rest, you can still not be participant in it. Why? Because you don't believe that God can actually provide you that rest. What? Who would ever do that? That's stupid. Who would ever do that? Well, Israel did that. They come out of Egypt. God splits the Red Sea. Come on now, right? And then he unfolds it back over the Egyptians as they come in their chariots. Come on now. Did you see that? Right? And then they end up going into the desert. And you know how that story goes, right? But they cross the desert and they're literally, a few weeks away from going right into the land of promise. God promises us this land. And they're right on the cusp of that. After going through all this stuff in the desert, quail, manna, you name it, it's been a long road, Red Sea, but woof, they're right there. And so they decide right when they're on the edge of it, let's send in some spies, just check out the place, get one person from every tribe, 12 of them go in, 12 of them come back. And they ask them, well, so how's it looking there? Great, huh? Well, there's giants. And there were. That wasn't a lie. There were. There were giants there. So they all agree that that's a fact. But then two of the spies, call them spies, but two of the guys that went in say, well, yeah, but we should still go in because God has promised us that. I mean, look where God has taken us so far. You think giants are going to get in the way? Because after all, it's a land of promise. Are you saying that God's promise, he can't fulfill his promise because of giants? And they all went, yeah, he can't do it. Disbelief. So the writer of Hebrews says they didn't find rest because of disbelief. They didn't believe that God could come good on his promise. It's a profound observation he makes. In fact, you and I won't find rest unless we believe that God's your benefactor and he wants good for you. You won't believe it. If you don't believe that, you'll never find that rest. This is the solemn rest to the Lord. Is the Lord the lover of your soul? Is he the one that provides for you amply? Is he the one who's involved in your daily life? Does he look at what goes on? Does he love you so much that he's going to intercede on your behalf? Is he like that? Yes. Well, then you'll find rest for your soul. But if you say, nah, I don't think so. Things were pretty bad last week. Maybe God is not like that. Will you find rest? No, you've just short-circuited it. So this solemn rest of the Lord not only includes God in the equation for your rest, but it includes your understanding and your embrace and trust of him as a God who loves you. Because if you embrace that, then it doesn't matter what whirlwind of junk is surrounding your life today or has. You can rest because you can say, well, but God, right? But it depends on you understanding the heart and character of God. And it depends on you stepping out in faith and trusting him that he can do this. Because the writer of Hebrews says they didn't believe that, and so they missed it. That whole generation died in the desert. Because they would not believe that God would deliver on his promise. So let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. I got to tell you, you got to read Hebrews. Because it takes that entire very well-known historical narrative you know about Israel, and he talks about how that reflects on the bigger cosmic eternal issues of life and God's intention for you and what it says. But there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And, and just to say the obvious, what we're talking about is not so much now, but at the end of the age. What's to come is that. But it actually can start right now. It can start as soon as you're willing, in the midst of the chaos that you're in. It comes as soon as you're willing to say, God, you are here. You love me. I'm in your hands. I'm going to rest in you. So the Sabbath, even right now, is a deliberate act that you make to say, God, I'm yours. And I'm going to trust in what you do. Now, let me just make more agricultural observation for the nation of Israel. God told them after they got into the land that you need to not work in your fields after 6 days of working in your fields. Well, and if you come from an agrarian culture, you realize that could be devastating, right? Because, if there's some bugs in your garden, we get bugs in our garden, and I swear to you, when you go to bed at night and you think about the bugs in your garden, you can hear them eating all your, And, you want to get up with a flashlight and go out there and pick those babies off your plants because, they'll just, one good horde of grasshoppers and, what you've worked for the entire year can be gone in a heartbeat. So for a farmer who not only makes his living from what he grows, but he keeps his family alive, the terror of taking a day off is a profound challenge to his ability to trust God to do it instead. See, it's a trust issue. It's a trust issue. Will I trust that God will take care of my garden and the future of my family if I take a day off and sit in the lawn chair and reflect on God's loving kindness? Will it still be okay? Will my family survive if I trust in God? That's a really fundamental challenge to your ability to trust God. If the outcome of it is if God does not come through, we may all die. See, it's a really big deal. Now, that's nothing compared to taking 1 year off every 7. Right? Come on. You mean we don't plant this year? If we don't plant, how does my family eat next year? Well, I'll give you twice as much in the year before. Well, okay, but still, this is creepy. This is creepy. If you don't plant, everybody dies. You want us to sit in lawn chairs outside sipping our iced tea and then watch everything go to hell? Is that what you want, God? He says, well, are you willing to trust me with that? Well, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. That's a big deal. Did Israel do the 7 years Sabbath? Well, not much. Because when we read Ezra and Nehemiah, they tell us in there. They tell us. It says, when you do the math about the number of years, the 490 years, you do the math. It looks like from the day that they entered the promised land, they never did it. Why? Because they went into the captivity of Babylon and then Persia for 70 years. Why? 70 years, 1 year for every year that you did not let it go fallow. Well, that happens every 7 years. So 70 years is the result of 490 years of not doing it. Well, from the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, and you go backwards 490 years, it goes back earlier than David. It looks like by the time they went in the land, they just never did it. Why? Because, that's a big deal not to plant. But God says, are you willing to believe that I can do this for you? Well, God, I'm not sure you really are good to your word. When you left Egypt, come on. You had a little bit of bread when you left Egypt. That ran out really fast. Really fast. Chapter 15, 16. It ran out really fast. And then you said, let's go back to Egypt. At least we had meat in the pots and we had all the bread we could eat. And God says, well, I'm going to choke you with meat and bread. Okay? And there came manna, right? Was God faithful for 40 years to feed them? Yes. Then you can take a year off every 7. I mean, that's what they should have said to themselves, but they... By the way, the they is us, so don't get all uppity. It's a big deal. Solemn rest of the Lord. Now, we read this today, too. I think God's coordinating with us because I didn't know these were going to be read today. Look at the Sabbath implications. Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He'll dwell with them. He'll dwell with them. And they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. And remember what Rich said? Where God is, in that place, Israel finds rest. Well, where is God? He's dwelling with us. And in his spirit, he dwells with us today. But this is the ultimate. This is the end. This is the big Sabbath we're talking about right here. And then he follows this up in verse 4 by saying, he'll wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. Now that's the penultimate super statement of the solemn rest to the Lord, right? That's it right there. That's what the writer of Hebrews was saying. There remains for the people of God a Sabbath rest. That's it. So that's the big thing that all of this other talk and observances of the Sabbath points toward. That's the actual bottom line right here, is this life with God. Like Rich says, where God is, in that place, you find rest. And then Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2:9, but as it's written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. The big Sabbath. There still remains for the people of God a Sabbath. And you haven't got a clue how great it's going to be. Now, this is why the Sabbath ends up being a theme for all of Leviticus 23. It ends up being a theme throughout the entire Bible. It ends up being mentioned in Genesis in the first couple chapters. There's the Sabbath. There's the seventh day. I mean, what is this? Maybe it's more important than we think it is. By the way, when you talk about the creation story, what do we quibble about on the creation story? Well, God made everything in 6 days, and so is the day a day, or is the day like 1,000 years? Is the day... Stop it. Just stop it. Just stop it. God can make the universe like this. Right? Which, he can. But he decides, when he describes the creation of the universe, in the very beginning of the Bible, in the beginning of the narrative of everything, he decides to describe it as a 6-day work week. Why? Because he's constrained to work 6 days. He's got to punch a clock every day of 6 days. Is he constrained by that? No. He's trying to tell you something, because God's a God who teaches you things by what he does. Like the Leviticus 23:7 feast, he's teaching us something in the creation itself by describing it by, he did it in 6 days. Well, so what's he trying to tell me? The seventh day. The seventh day. He worked 6, and on the 7th, he rested. Because God gets really tired. No. No, stop it. Stop it. Because what comes next in the Genesis narrative? The Garden of Eden. 7th day is God walking in the coolness of the day with his created human beings that he loves. That's actually the Sabbath. The Sabbath, in a cosmic sense, is a return to the relationship between God's creation of us, mankind, and God as our creator, coexisting and dwelling together in one place. He created the place. He provides for us in that place. Lift up your arm, pick a piece of fruit off of any tree, you'll love it, except for, there's some restrictions there. But come on, you're not going to have to till any fields in this garden, because every tree that you see, except one, every tree that's here, pull it off and it's great for food. Can you imagine not having to plow a field? And you just walk to a tree and go, oh. It's portable loveliness when you eat fruit. It's just a great thing. Great picture. So even back to the beginning of creation, God decides to tell us about the nuts and bolts of creation in order to give us a clue about the Sabbath. Maybe this is an overarching theme of the entire Bible. And what is the Sabbath about? The Sabbath is about intimate relationship with God, about us laying down all the busyness and reserving some time just to be with God. Is that maybe, in fact, the reason for the creation of the universe? It's a bigger issue than just what day of the week. In fact, Dorothy and I were just recording about Paul's address in Athens in Acts 17, and he's talking to these super intellectual pagans, pagan philosophers, quite adept at arguing, right? And he's there in Athens, and his presentation to them is just profound. But you know, in one part of that, he says, "Listen, you guys, God's the God I'm talking about, the unknown God you don't know. The God I'm talking about is the God who's made everything. Not only has He made everything, He's made all of you, and you know, and where you live, and the area that you live in, all of it, He's made you as well." And he says the reason for that, the reason for the creation of everything and of mankind, is this: so that groping in the dark you might find Him. But He's actually not far from any of us. He says this to the Athenians. Blows their minds, I think. They're going, wow, what? Well, that didn't blow their mind as much as when he said Jesus rose from the dead. What? And then they stopped the whole presentation. But the interesting thing is that in passing, as Paul talks about to these pagans who know nothing about biblical history at all, they don't know the Bible at all, he does say that the God I'm talking about is a God who's bigger than everything in the universe. He made everything in the universe. He made every man. He made every one of us. He made every one of us. In that sense, we are His children. Every one of us, He made us. And by the way, He made us so that in a very ineffective, incapable way, you'll feel around for Him, you want to try and find Him, and He will let you find Him. That's why God made mankind. Because the Sabbath relationship with God is the intended purpose of all creation. Let that sink in for a little bit. Because, you know, even though in the garden, even though Adam and Eve, they were assisting in maintaining, they weren't creating. They, you know, that I wouldn't call that work to pick, you know, fruit off trees and eat them. That's the end goal. So if you think of the Sabbath as kind of a return to the Garden of Eden in the sense of the relationship between God and His created men and women, that's what the Sabbath is supposed to be like. Can the Sabbath you do on the seventh day during the week, can it be like that? Yes. Really? Yes. Yes. So, until the big Sabbath happens, we're going to celebrate a Sabbath. Now, you can celebrate a Sabbath in your own way and in your own style. I believe that's actually okay. After 6 days of arduous work, take a day off and trust that God will cover for you when you're not doing all the other stuff. And make sure it's not just, you know, a brain dead Sabbath where you just say, I'm going to sleep the whole day because I've had a hard week. And spend some time with the Lord. You know, consider what He's done for you. That's what Sabbath is meant to do. Isaiah 26:9. I just love this verse. My soul yearns for you in the night. My spirit within me earnestly seeks you. That should be the motto of the Sabbath, right there. And also, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 3:16, don't you know that you're God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? And remember what Rich Robinson said? Wherever God is, that place, that's where you find rest. Well, where is He? He's in you. You can do it anytime, any place, all the time. Come to Him. You can come to Him. It just works. Okay, I promised you 2 stories. Let me give you one last story, and then we'll quit. There was a man and a daughter who lived in a very small rural town. And in this small town, the daughter got to be 5, she got into kindergarten, and mom died. Left dad raising the daughter all by himself. And He loved his daughter greatly. She loved him. But the loss of the mom was just a horrible thing. Anyway, the daughter grows up in this small town. The dad encourages her to go off and get an education. She ends up leaving for a few years to get a college degree. And she gets a college degree, and every summer she comes back and she's with dad, and great relationship. He loved her tremendously. She loves him tremendously. And then when she graduates, she gets a big corporate job in the big city that's not too far away. And so she tells her dad, Dad, I love you tremendously, but I think I want to pursue this job in the big city. And our town is not that far away, but I mean, I'm going to move over there. And Dad says, well, okay, listen, I think that's a good idea. I love that for you, so pursue that. However, he said, can we make a deal? And she said, what is that? She said, well, can we do this? Can I propose that every Friday night I'll drive into town, I'll drive into the big city, and I'll make a reservation in a restaurant, and we'll have dinner together every Friday night. And that way we won't lose touch. Because I know you're going to get so involved in the corporate world and the business of what's going on there. Can you just do this for me? I'll pay for dinner, he says. I'll pay for dinner. You don't have to worry about that. I'll drive in from our town. I'll find the restaurant. I'll make a reservation. In fact, he says, I know this nice restaurant. I'll make a reservation. Tell the manager that to put the reservation on the calendar in the restaurant every Friday night just for the two of us. And we'll do that. And she says, Daddy, that'd be great. So she goes off to college, and she starts coming out to this restaurant every Friday night. And as she comes into the restaurant, there's her dad sitting at a table. And the first time it happens, she sits down with him, and she looks as she sits down at the table, and there's a reservation sign on the table, but it's not one that the restaurant made. It's one that he made. It's just a goofy little reservation sign. And he and his daughter had so much loved saying fun things to each other in Spanish that he wrote it in Spanish, right? Reservado. So he writes reservado on this thing, puts it, and she laughs. I mean, it's just pretty tacky, horrible, artistic attempt by her dad. But it said something kind of special to her, like this table's reserved for my daughter and me every night. And so this goes on for years. And a lot of the people that the daughter works with, co-workers and stuff like that, they start arranging all these parties and stuff on Friday night. And they say, why don't you come to this party tonight on Friday night? She says, well, no, I've got another plan. Oh, you got a boyfriend out there somewhere? Well, no, I have dinner with my dad. And they go, oh, isn't that sweet? You have dinner with your dad. Yeah. She says, well, yeah, it's really kind of nice. And then they ask her questions. They say, well, I mean, what do you talk about? He's just your dad. Can't you just give him a phone call every now and then? Well, no, we sit at a table, he makes a reservation. There's this goofy little sign, reservado, that he puts on the table. It's kind of pathetic, but I love it. And we sit there and we talk about stuff. We talk about life. We talk about things that concern me. And she said, it's kind of a funny thing because my dad doesn't sit there and preach to me or tell me what I should or shouldn't do. He listens an awful lot. And I bring up things that are troubling to me. And her friends would say, well, like what? I mean, what would you talk to your dad about at dinner? She says, well, believe it or not, it's been 20 years since my mom passed away. And when I get together with him, I say, I still miss her. And he doesn't say much. He just grabs my hand and he says, I know. It hurts. I know. And then we talk about all the other things that concern me. The sillinesses in the world. The things that tear me back and forth. We eat some nice food. He says some gentle things. It's really quite nice. So she tells her friends, no, I'm not going to go out drinking with you tonight. I have a very important appointment with my father. And it fills me up in ways you'll never understand. So she did that for years. And for years, the conversation never wanted for conversation topics. It's mostly what was on her mind. And in a gentle reassurance, he would tell her, I'm always here, and I love you tremendously, and that'll never change. And I'll see you next week, right? She goes, absolutely. That's the Sabbath. Right there. That's the Sabbath. It's not about what you don't do. It's about what you do in the presence of God. And because of that, we let the world eat us up because we just sidestep it. Reservado. Okay, let's pray. Father, we pray that you would teach us about your Sabbath, that you teach us about the intimate intentions you have to be near us, about your heart that loves to hear our voices and our concerns, about the God who's eager to sit with us in quiet moments. Lord, forgive us when we let the businesses edge it out. Forgive us when we tend to think that you are so very far away and unconcerned. And yet there's your Sabbath that's waiting. There's that table set. There's that little sign, handmade, that says this is reserved for you. And Father, I pray that you would begin to transform our hearts as we do this, as we start to understand the tremendous depths of knowledge of you and being with you, and how even now it is so life-giving to us, but even now it points to a much bigger, greater time. There still remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And Lord, how this repeatedly points us in hope and expectation to the day in which all these things that trouble us will be behind us, and we'll have nothing but Sabbath all the time. The great Sabbath of all days. God, you are so good to us, and in the midst of our existence, you draw near to us by being in us. You bless us with your nearness. We pray that you teach us how to be near with you. So thank you for all this in Jesus' name. Amen.